For over a century, Teotihuacan has baffled archaeologists. A colossal city with pyramids rivaling Egypt, yet no clue who built it or why. But in October 2025, everything changed. Researchers finally cracked its ancient script, and what they uncovered wasn't just surprising, it was terrifying. Teotihuacan wasn't just a city of gods, it was the stage for mass ritual, elite collapse, and a revolution that wiped itself out from within. The truth is darker than myth. When the mystery finally cracked. In October 2025, a team of linguists and archaeologists finally deciphered a long unsolved writing system linked to Teotihuacan, the massive city in the Valley of Mexico that peaked around 500 CE. For over a century, scholars had puzzled over fragments of glyphs on murals, pottery, and stone carvings found scattered across the city's 20 square kilometers urban grid. Despite Teotihuacan's size, home to an estimated 150,000 to 200,000 people around the mid-first millennium, no known text had ever identified the city's own builders. That silence baffled experts from 1930 onward. The breakthrough began with a linguistic team at the University of Copenhagen under the leadership of Dr. Magnus Hansen and Dr. Christoph Helmke. Using pattern analysis and phonetic reconstruction methods first applied to Egyptian hieroglyphs, they realized Teotihuacan's glyphs were not symbolic images alone, but phonetic signs. These signs worked using a rebus principle, where pictures represent sounds, not just objects. This was a monumental shift from earlier assumptions that compared these glyphs with later Aztec Nahuatl or Maya script. Applying this new approach, the team constructed a rudimentary lexicon of Teotihuacan signs and began matching them with contemporary Central Mexican languages and early forms of Nahuatl. Months of cross-referencing mural texts with inscriptions from neighboring Totonac and Zapotec regions yielded consistent phonetic patterns. By July 2025, the code was nearly broken. Then, in October, a series of newly cleaned wall texts revealed readable names, titles, and phrases that spoke directly about identity, origin, and rulership. Most importantly, these deciphered texts revealed that the people who built Teotihuacan spoke an early form of Nahuatl, linguistically connecting them with later Central Mexican cultures. For the first time, the builders stopped being a blank slate. Their voices, once silent for 15 centuries, were beginning to speak again. The revelation would not only resolve a long-standing archaeological mystery, but reshape how scholars view cultural continuity in ancient Mesoamerica. With the script's breakthrough now established, the next section examines Teotihuacan itself. Its astounding urban scale, planned grid, pyramids, and hydraulic systems that made it one of the ancient world's great superpowers. The ancient superpower. Long before Europeans built grid cities like Barcelona or Paris, Teotihuacan rose in the Valley of Mexico as one of the ancient world's most sophisticated urban centers. Laid out on a strict grid system oriented to the cardinal directions, its streets cut straight lines across the city's 2.5-kilometer-long central axis called the Avenue of the Dead, a monumental thoroughfare aligned with astronomical events like the zenith passage of the sun. Scholars estimate Teotihuacan's population around 500 CE peaked between 150,000 and 200,000, making it larger than contemporary European cities such as Constantinople or London at the same time. The city's engineering feats extended far beyond urban planning. Teotihuacan builders constructed massive pyramids on a scale that rivaled ancient Egyptian monuments. The Pyramid of the Sun, rising approximately 65 meters, 213 feet, above the valley floor, has a base nearly equal in area to the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt. Nearby, the Pyramid of the Moon and hundreds of residential compounds attest to centralized authority and coordinated labor over multiple generations, perhaps lasting 2 centuries or more during the city's florescence. Yet Teotihuacan's technological reach wasn't limited to monuments. The city diverted the San Juan River and engineered a citywide hydraulic network with canals, drains, and reservoirs that controlled seasonal flooding and distributed water across the sprawling 20-square-kilometer urban landscape. When explorers first mapped these systems in the 1950s, they were astonished that ancient technology was still effective. with gravel-lined channels and siphon features that modern engineers could only approximate. Despite these monumental achievements, grid planning, pyramids, and waterworks, Teotihuacan left few clear textual markers identifying its rulers or founding peoples. For over a century, archaeologists found statues and murals full of symbolic imagery, but no royal names or dynastic records. This incongruity between technological advancement and historical anonymity made Teotihuacan one of archaeology's greatest enigmas. For centuries, Teotihuacan's silence invited myths and speculation. The next section explores that silence, how the Aztecs encountered the city, and why its own story was lost to time. The silence of the ruins. When the Aztecs encountered the ruins of Teotihuacan in the 1400s, they were struck speechless. Walking the broad avenues and standing before massive platforms, they saw a city larger and older than anything in their own capital of Tenochtitlan. Yet, unlike Aztec cities with monumental inscriptions and calendrical texts, Teotihuacan's core lacked coherent writing proclaiming rulers, lineage, or dynastic achievements. Instead, explorers found monumental architecture, pyramids, compounds, artisan quarters, but almost no historical narrative written by the people who built it. This profound quiet invited awe and myth. The Aztecs named the site Teotihuacan, meaning the place where gods were created, reflecting their belief that sacred cosmic forces shaped the city. They thought humans could not have built such marvels. For them, the city was a divine artifact, an origin point beyond ordinary history. In 1520, when Spanish chroniclers recorded accounts from Aztec elders, this same sense of sacred mystery emerged, a place ancient as Temiscamnhel left by hands unknown. For over 500 years, this silence fueled speculation. Did the Toltecs build it? Were the Totonacs responsible? Some scholars proposed a lost civilization, distinct from known Mesoamerican groups. Others placed its origin outside the region entirely. Yet despite extensive excavations beginning in the 19th century, no inscription reliably named founders, kings, or dates of major events. Puzzle fragments, murals, talud tablero architecture, obsidian workshops suggested common cultural threads, but not origin stories. The result was a paradox. One of the largest and most sophisticated cities of pre-Columbian America, crucial to later civilizations, had left no readable history of its own. Sites like Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent, Quetzalcoatl, hinted at elite centers, yet yielded no foundational texts. Scholars believed Teotihuacan's silence was absolute, until the recent decipherment revealed a lost language embedded in its art, now speaking back to us after nearly 1,500 years. Now that we understand both the city's grandeur and its long silence, the next section will dive into the lost language and script that recently yielded its secrets. Hidden scripts in the lost language. By the 1960s, archaeologists began identifying fragments of glyphs within Teotihuacan murals and pottery, particularly at sites like Tititla, Atatelco, and the Palace of the Jaguars. Unlike the complex phonetic glyphs of the Maya, which had been partially deciphered by that time, Teotihuacan's symbols remained elusive. They appeared stylized and repetitive, but resisted translation. For decades, scholars assumed the city had no formal writing system, or if it did, it was purely symbolic. The real issue was misidentification. Researchers tried to compare Teotihuacan glyphs with Aztec Nahuatl, the dominant language of post-1200 CE central Mexico. But the writing system of Teotihuacan, used from 200 to 600 CE, functioned on different principles. Unlike Maya logograms or Aztec ideograms, the Teotihuacan script combined rebus symbols and phonetic hints. This hybrid made it look deceptively decorative, misleading scholars for over 70 years. It wasn't until 2023 that researchers at the Instituto Nacional de Antropología e Historia, INAH, began reanalyzing the glyphs using AI-assisted image recognition. By feeding thousands of mural fragments into machine learning models trained on early Mesoamerican scripts, patterns emerged. The breakthrough came when glyphs at Plaza of the Columns complex were matched with phonetic values tied to a Proto-Nahuatl language. Not classical Aztec, but a linguistic ancestor dating back to around 400 CE. This early Nahuatl connection unlocked dozens of previously unreadable names, titles, and ceremonial phrases. One glyph cluster found at Structure 5C2 spelled out a ruler's name alongside the word for fire ceremony, dated via stratigraphy to 520 CE. These discoveries not only proved Teotihuacan had a structured writing system, but also that it was used to record political and religious life. What had once been decorative now read like announcements and ritual calendars. With the language now partially deciphered, the next revelation hit even harder: the true cultural identity of Teotihuacan's builders and their connection to one of the most famous civilizations in the Americas. The true builders revealed. The newly deciphered glyphs stunned researchers. The builders of Teotihuacan weren't strangers to later civilizations. They were the ancestors of the Aztecs. The language embedded in murals, pottery, and stone walls showed clear evidence of early Nahuatl, a direct predecessor to the language spoken by Mexica elites in the 14th and 15th centuries. It meant that when the Aztecs found Teotihuacan abandoned in the 1400s, they weren't discovering a foreign world. They were rediscovering their own forgotten heritage. Names found in the Pyramid of the Moon Chambers aligned with Nahuatl syntax and deities later worshipped by the Aztecs. For example, a glyph sequence at Temple Structure 3E referred to Tlacochtecalcatl, a military title used by Aztec generals over 800 years later. Even more striking, celestial references in the text mirrored calendars used by Toltecs and Aztecs alike, suggesting continuity in religious cosmology and governance. This evidence redefined long-standing theories. Scholars had previously speculated that Teotihuacan was built by the Totonacs, Mixtecs, or an unknown vanished group. But linguistic, genetic, and cultural links now point to a continuous Mesoamerican tradition rooted in central Mexico, with Teotihuacan as its founding center. The myth of a lost civilization was replaced by a deeper story of cultural survival and reinvention. The Aztecs, who once considered Teotihuacan a divine place made by gods, had unknowingly preserved its rituals and beliefs. Their empire, rising around 1325 CE, was built on the legacy of a city that flourished nearly 900 years earlier. Through glyphs, we now hear that lineage speaking. The writing confirms not only continuity, but intentional preservation of sacred knowledge across the centuries, all hidden in plain sight until 2025. With the builders finally identified, archaeologists turned to Teotihuacan's end. How could such a powerful city collapse so fast? The answer shocked everyone. It wasn't war, it was revolution. Catastrophic collapse. Teotihuacan collapsed around 550 CE, but what caused its fall had baffled researchers for decades. Unlike cities destroyed by invaders, Teotihuacan's downfall left no signs of foreign conquest. No mass graves, no enemy artifacts, and no major battle damage. What Aina archaeologists uncovered instead were layers of ash, collapsed buildings, and scorched murals, especially concentrated in elite sectors like the Temple of the Feathered Serpent and Compound of the High Priests. The destruction seemed deliberate and internal. Excavations in the Avenue of the Dead complex between 2008 and 2012 revealed that temples, palaces, and high-status compounds were burned methodically, but nearby housing blocks remained untouched. This suggested the lower classes didn't suffer indiscriminate violence. They may have led the destruction. Radiocarbon dating of charred beams and burned plaster placed the event around 545 to 550 CE, shortly after climate data records a global cooling event due to volcanic activity, likely the 536 CE eruption in the Northern Hemisphere. Teotihuacan's leaders had built their legitimacy on cosmic favor and agricultural prosperity. They orchestrated rituals tied to celestial alignments and seasonal abundance. But when climate disaster struck, crops failed, food ran short, and the divine order faltered. The people didn't just suffer, they acted. Archaeological signs point to a coordinated, symbolic burning of power centers. It wasn't looting, it was rejection. The populace dismantled the structure that had once elevated their rulers to divine status. After the fires, Teotihuacan wasn't looted or sacked, it was abandoned. By 600 CE, over 80% of the city's population was gone. But this wasn't chaos. Evidence suggests organized migration. Families packed up, communities moved together, and knowledge traveled with them. The civilization didn't vanish. It resettled, carrying the legacy of Teotihuacan into other regions. The fire may have ended one empire, but it sparked the rebirth of cultural identity across Mesoamerica. The collapse had deeper causes than politics or economy. Climate played a fatal role. But strange findings beneath Teotihuacan's temples suggest something even more mysterious was part of its final chapter. The role of climate disaster. Around 535 to 536 CE, a massive volcanic eruption in the tropics triggered a global climate event that altered weather patterns far beyond its origin. Ice core samples from Greenland and Antarctica, dated precisely to 535 CE, show a dramatic spike in atmospheric sulfur, indicating one of the largest known volcanic injections of aerosol into the stratosphere. The result was an abrupt global temperature drop, with tree ring data showing 2 to 5 years of stunted growth across multiple continents. This sudden cooling disrupted crop cycles and undermined agricultural systems everywhere, especially in regions dependent on precise seasonal rainfall. Teotihuacan, situated in the highland basin of central Mexico at roughly 2,300 meters above sea level, depended heavily on maize, beans, squash, and amaranth crops, all sensitive to weather swings. The city's 20 square kilometers urban footprint was supported by an agricultural hinterland stretching across valley soils and seasonal irrigation channels. When climate patterns shifted and growing seasons failed, the city's staple production collapsed. This wasn't minor crop loss. It was a systemic failure that undermined food security for hundreds of thousands. For Teotihuacan's rulers, authority was built on promises of cosmic favor, abundance, and continuity. Political and religious legitimacy tied closely to agricultural success. Elite ideology portrayed kings as intermediaries between celestial forces and the Earth's fertility. When destructive frost and drought struck after 536 CE, those claims unraveled rapidly. Popular faith in leadership eroded as staples shrank and famine spread from 536 to 540 CE. Rather than an external enemy, the crisis resembled a loss of confidence in the ruling class. Archaeologists now interpret the systematic burning of elite districts, temples, palaces, and administrative compounds dated to 550 CE as symbolic rejection. The ordinary citizens didn't just flee starvation, they actively dismantled the structures that represented failed cosmic authority. What followed was not chaotic exodus, but intentional departure, as tens of thousands organized their exit, migrating in clusters to other Mesoamerican centers. Climate neither explains everything nor reveals the whole ritual complexity of Teotihuacan's religious life. The next section explores a bizarre discovery beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent that challenges assumptions about ritual and technology. Mercury beneath the Feathered Serpent. In 2015, archaeologists working in sealed underground tunnels beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent uncovered something so unexpected that it reframed how researchers think about ritual spaces at Teotihuacan. At a depth of roughly 18 to 20 meters, in chambers untouched for nearly 1,800 years, workers discovered pools of liquid mercury, literally gallons of it, spread behind monumental stone walls that once supported elite ceremonial platforms. Mercury is rare naturally in central Mexico, suggesting deliberate import from distant mining regions like Almaden, Spain, or Idrija, Slovenia, via long trade networks known during the early Classic period. Mercury doesn't just sit quietly. At room temperature, it is liquid, but its vapors, released in enclosed spaces, can cause tremors, paranoia, and hallucinations. In numerous cultures, mercury has been associated with liminal zones, the underworld, or agents of transformation. But its presence beneath one of Teotihuacan's most sacred temples suggests something distinct, far beyond decoration. The quantity alone, the equivalent of dozens of small industrial vats, requires massive resource investment, knowledge of extraction technology, and a purpose tied deeply to elite ideology. From ritual to migration, the next section reveals how Teotihuacan's population didn't scatter randomly after collapse. They moved in coordinated waves with cultural continuity across Mesoamerica. Organized exodus, not chaos. After Teotihuacan's political and ritual centers were destroyed around 550 CE, something remarkable occurred. The city didn't simply empty out haphazardly. Archaeological surveys along major Mesoamerican corridor routes have uncovered dense clusters of ceramic styles, architectural features, and settlement patterns remarkably similar to Teotihuacan's around 560 to 620 CE. These appear not as isolated scatterings, but as cultural signatures carried into regions such as the Valley of Oaxaca, the Gulf Coast, and the Maya Highlands. This pattern suggests organized migration, not random dispersion. Rather than a mass panic or disorganized flight, the evidence supports coordinated relocation. Families, craftsmen, priests, and administrators moving in groups to reestablish socioeconomic footholds elsewhere. This diaspora likely influenced the socio-political development of classic and post-classic polities across Mesoamerica. Far from ending Teotihuacan's cultural impact, the city's collapse helped seed the next era of civilization. Teotihuacan's influence lived on, but the final piece of its legacy shows how its language, ritual, and societal structure shaped later cultures in ways still visible today. The legacy and its dark implications. Teotihuacan was never just a city, it was a crucible of cultural identity. The deciphered script shows its language. An early form of Nahuatl didn't vanish with the city's destruction. Instead, it resurfaced centuries later in the linguistic traditions of later Central Mexican societies, including the Toltecs and the Aztecs by 1325 CE. This continuity overturns the old model of cultural rupture and suggests Teotihuacan's worldview, cosmological, cosmopolitan, and hierarchically structured, lived on in political, religious, and artistic traditions across regions and centuries. The collapse of Teotihuacan was not a simple fall to enemies. It was an internal rupture catalyzed by climate catastrophe and social revolution. This matters because it reframes how historians see governance legitimacy, ritual authority, and mass movement in ancient states. It shows that when a civilization built its power on reliance, on staple crops, cosmic legitimacy, and elite ritual, the loss of any component could trigger transformative upheaval. The ruins may be silent, but their story is not. As we unearth Teotihuacan's true purpose, we're forced to ask, how close are we to repeating their fate?